You may be asking, well, why didn't the wealthy 40% in the early church help the poor 60%? And that's a very good question. But the question could also be, why didn't the wealthy 40% just forgive all the debt and release all their slaves? But you know, I've learned long ago to never try to answer why other people do the things they do. So I really can't answer that question. But I do know that was the situation of the Christian church in the first century. Now, right after Pentecost, the book of Acts tells us that they shared all things in common. But obviously, little by little, they lost their first love experience. So the early Christian churches were located in an atmosphere and in a culture of lavish poverty, of lavish prosperity and abject poverty, with hardly no middle class. And folks, I have to be honest with you, but in case you haven't noticed, that is exactly what's happening to us here in this country. And it's also happening around the world. The middle class is disappearing. And you either have the very rich or the very poor. And every day that goes by, it seems the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And the church of the Lord Jesus Christ has an assignment. We really don't have a target group. We don't have a target group that we're going after. We're not either going after the very rich or the very poor. Because God has just told us that the target group is everybody. The whole world. Okay. There's two more words that I want you to put together. Pressure and persecution. Pressure and persecution. The churches and the believers of the early church in Asia were under tremendous pressure because of the culture in which they found themselves in, much of it just like we have today. Because on the one hand, there was a godless culture with its pagan music, its pagan drama, its pagan vice, and the times were unbelievably degenerate, and it resulted in the moral degradation of Roman society. And history is very clear about what the Romans were like. Because the Roman arenas were filled with tens of thousands of people who had one desire and one desire only. And that was to see blood. And any and all types of mutilization of animals and beasts and human beings. And they would flock to the arenas just to see animals and men dismember each other and fight to the death. And as the English historian Edward Gibbons tells us, stated in his acclaimed book, The History and the Decline of the Fall of the Roman Empire, quote, "The people of that culture had become obsessed with amusements and entertainment and sporting enterprises." Close quote. Does that sound familiar to us in America? Obsessed with amusements and entertainment and sporting enterprises? Folks, this is the Roman Empire again today in America, just before her collapse. So there in the first century A.D., there was this tremendous godless culture, and the early Christians had to be very careful that they not be assimilated into this sinful culture. But there was another big danger. In addition to that, there were also these humanistic religions in their day. Because Rome had its pantheon. Now, the word pantheon is taken from two Greek words. Excuse me just a moment. Two Greek words. The first is pan, which means all. The other word is theos, which means God. So pantheon simply means all gods. In other words, they had room for all kinds of gods. Different gods, many gods, just all different paths to heaven. We ever hear that today? Oh, this is just a different path that leads to heaven. Many paths that all lead to the same destination. And oh, that sounds so warm and so fuzzy. But it will lead you straight to hell. Because Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life, and no man comes into the Father but by me. And the Romans believed the same thing, that there were many gods and many paths to heaven. Sometimes it was emperor worship. And that during some periods of the Roman Empire, the emperor was the god. And many of the Roman emperors got to the point where they demanded that they be worshipped. And this created some real problems for the Christians, obviously. These were also the days of the mystery religions of Rome that catered for mere emotion and extremes of the people. And I'm sure you've probably heard about the temple prostitutes that the pagan temples had in those early days of Rome, where their situation was merely emotion and feelings. Anything that was enjoyable and exciting to them, and in the name of religion, they had all types of orgies and ecstasies and all types of debaucheries in these mystery religions in those days, and it was all going on in the name of worship. So folks, please understand what the apostles and the early Christian church was grappling with. On the one hand, there was this tremendous pressure on the part of the Christians to cave into the culture, but on the other hand, if they did not, then they faced withering persecution. Whenever Rome conquered a particular area of geography, whatever the religion or religions of that area were, Rome just incorporated into their pantheon that religion and used it to their benefit. And most of the people in those conquered areas had no problem with that, because Rome let them keep their own gods. And Rome just included their gods under their big umbrella of pantheon of many gods. And they just added these new gods to their list. I mean, what's a few more gods? The more the merrier. But that was not the case with this new sect called Christians, who followed this Nazarene carpenter who had been crucified. Oh no, they were troublemakers. They refused to acknowledge anyone else's God but their God. And they refused to include any other god in their worship to their God. And they refused to worship any other god but their one God. And this just really infuriated the Romans. You see, many of the Roman empires, of the Roman emperors, claimed to be God. And they had temples set up all over the Roman Empire, where once a year every citizen had to go into one of these emperor temples and take a pinch of incense and put it on the fire and say, Caesar is Lord. Now, really didn't mean anything. Took about 2 seconds. Caesar's Lord. And they didn't even have to believe it. And they could do it in relatively privacy, one or two people watching just to verify that they were. I mean, it's kind of like voting. But hundreds, yea, thousands, even tens of thousands of those early Christians would not do that.